Hey, welcome back to the Transforming Work Book Club. I am so excited to be here. Look at this. Look at the guest list today. Look at the guest speakers. We got Shakil, Perry Timms, and David Liddle. In fact, I've been challenged to try and finish this conversation in 1 hour. So good luck to me. That's a challenge I accept with absolute fear because I know that if we start speaking, this can go on for a whole day. But so much to dive into. This is, of course, brought to you by the People and Culture Association, which is a membership think tank. We're around 600 odd members now. The HR space, the people and culture space, the conflict resolution space, coaching, leadership, various individuals who have joined us from different parts of the globe. If you haven't joined us yet, it's very simple. Once again, you can just scan this code on your screen. You can join us as a member, an international member now, and it's completely free. So share this with, of course, your networks. Ask them to come join us. We meet once a month on the last week of every month, and it's a great chance to once again network and share your stories, maybe even share your challenges and get some help and advice from others in the space. It's also a great place once again to get to know what's happening and what's trending in the space of people, culture, and leadership. Man, I got so much to get to today. I am not going to try and introduce these three folks to you. If you do not know these best-selling authors, you're probably living under the rock. All right, so I'm not going to try and do that. We got so much to dive into. But I just want to say quickly hi to the Chief Energy Officer of PTHR, Perry Timms, of course, HR most influential thinker, ranked number 1 in 2022. And then they didn't know what to do with him in 2023. So they inducted him into the Hall of Fame because you can't go beyond rank 1. Perry Timms, thank you so much for being with us today and welcome on board.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for the intro. I mean, geez, I could blush, but it just hits the heart, mate. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. And of course, we're going to be diving into Perry's book. Today we're going to be getting into some very interesting questions. If you do not have a copy of the HR operating model, Kogan Page is, of course, offering a 25% discount to all the viewers today. So all you got to do is go to Amazon and put in that code word Kogan Page 25 for the 25% off on Perry's book. But yeah, so much to dive into. And let's quickly say hi to, of course, Shakil Butt, who's, of course, joining us. Shakil is, of course, an award-winning G&I consultant. He was nominated to the HR Most Influential Thinker list. He's a lecturer and author, public speaker, and of course, today we are diving into his book, which is Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Explained. Shakil, thank you so much for making time and joining us on the book club.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jonathan, and thank you for having me. So, unlike Perry, I am actually blushing, but I've just gone a darker shade of brown.
Wonderful.
There you go. I already know this is going to be a killer of a conversation. Thank you so much, Shakil. Once again, if you haven't got a copy of that book, you can once again go to Amazon and put in that code Kogan Page 25 to get a 25% discount. And of course, the third author joining us today, of course, is the HR Most Influential, ranked number 1 for 2025, David Liddle. David, thank you so much for joining us today, of course, and also consultant of the year 2025. And David's book, People and Culture, is out in January 2026. So this is one you can't get a hard copy of yet, but you can pre-order it and start to build up that excitement into January already. So best-selling authors, 3 HR most influential thinkers, and we got to try and have a fast-paced conversation in the next 60 minutes. There's so much to dive into, but of course, thank you for once again joining us, David, on this People and Culture, on this Transforming Work Book Club.
Oh, sorry, Jonathan. I was just looking at Danny Wareham's saying Happy Friday live on LinkedIn. It's so good to have people here on LinkedIn. So apologies, I missed my cue there. But Danny, hello, how are you? Great to be here, of course, Jonathan, and really looking forward to the conversation today. And I'll try not to get distracted by comments coming in, but do share comments as well, of course.
Absolutely. And Danny always kicks us off with those comments. Yeah. If you're joining us live, wherever you're joining us from, say hi on the LinkedIn comments or the YouTube comments. And if you have a question for Shakil or David or Perry at any time during the next 1 hour, please drop that in and we'll try and address that. There's one big news if you're joining us live, by the way. You can actually get a free copy of any of these 3 books, guess what? A free copy. All you got to do is you got to drop a comment in the LinkedIn comments section, and you got to share with us your favorite quote from Shakil or Perry or David today. So they will be speaking over the next 60 minutes. And if you like anything that they're saying, just drop in there, comment on that. The moment you comment on LinkedIn, your name's in the entry list, and then we'll have a lucky draw. We'll try and do the lucky draw live, but if not, we're going to do it in post-production and announce it on LinkedIn. All right. So you have a chance to win a free copy of that book as well. So we're already 5 minutes into this. We want to dive in straight away. Perry, Shakil, David, thank you so much once again for joining us on the podcast. Let's dive straight into it. I think the big question is, you've written books over the last few years, but why this book now, right? So let me get straight into it. Maybe let's start things off with Perry today. Perry, why the HR operating model today, and how did you go about writing that?
Oh, thank you. That's a real honor to start, isn't it? So you mentioned HR Most Influential 2022, and it was that year that I thought to myself, this is a real honor that people kind of bestow on you. So therefore, what can I give back? And I remember Robin Williams once said, if you give back, you've taken too much already, right? So that was in my mind. But I thought, what could I give back? And I absolutely know the moment that I started to think, well, what could be? It was Bless Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's funeral day. And at the back end of the afternoon, I was sat there thinking, oh, you know, what a change in almost like, you know, one thing I've only ever known. And that kind of genuinely sparked me to then think about the HR operating model. What a weird connection, right? Because I was thinking I've only ever known working in the Ulrich model. And so I then started to do a little bit of research and a little bit of sketching, and that's where it started. That's the genesis of it. But why? Why do we need it? I think we only have to look at the way work is an incredibly messy entity, and we try and create all this order with silos and functions and splits and divisions. And I just kept thinking to myself, that's not what the world's asking us to do anymore. It is not asking us to categorize into flows. It is asking us to go to the flow in a way that we assemble very differently. And I also had this thought, and I've spoken to people a lot about this. HR sits at this beautiful intersection between people, culture, performance, and all 3 of those things are defined by science. Yet science is not something that's our calling card enough. So I started thinking, how can we get more science into what we do? And then I thought, but it can't sit on its own, because science has to be underpinned and connected to the systems that we work in and that we create. They need processes in order to activate them. And ultimately, the final thing that happens is that people get products they consume, policies, programs, things that help them create value and solve problems. That's where it came from, literally that. And I sketched it out. My first instinct was, who am I to put a new operating model out into the world? So I checked with a few friends who are CPOs and HR practitioners, sort of said, look, I've got this idea. And they came back and went, oof, big ask, but do you know what? Might be onto something here. So that's really where it started, Jonathan.
Fantastic. And, you know, having written already 2 books, I'm sure that was not too much of a task, right? Getting another few thousand words in there. But I'm sure David, I'm sure David would empathize with that. I know that you were kind of juggling 3 books at one time, David, in the build up to People and Culture coming up in January. Kind of similar themes, I would say, with Perry's book, which is, you know, talking about HR 3.0. But, you know, your book, David, makes a strong case for the evolving HR function, and you say that it's now evolving into the people and culture function. What does that shift truly mean, you know, in terms of in the practice, in the practical world?
Is that for me, JR? Yeah. So yeah, it's a really great point. So when I love what Perry's described there, and the sort of how he was moved to write that book. And I guess I've kind of been on a similar journey, but very much following in the footsteps of giants like Perry and others. But I've seen sort of firsthand in my work in mediation and coaching and sort of cultural change within organizations, what I've often perceived as very adversarial systems that have been built up within our organizations, and often very corrosive and combative systems for resolving issues. And people have told me many times, almost too many times for me to continue to ignore it. which is people's experience of the old legacy HR systems and processes. As much as they played an important point for a rules-based system, which underpinned ED&I and justice and good organizational compliance, actually were having a counter effect. They were undermining relationships and creating toxicity. So the reason I kind of started to evolve my thinking on people and culture, which I began in transformational culture in 2020 when I wrote my book, but then it sort of evolved further, was really just honoring all of the work that's gone on in the past, but saying it's time for a shift. It's time for us to move forward, and moving forward through the lens of really how to summarize it is people are the business. Business is defined by its culture, and leaders shape the culture of our organization. So in that phrase, there's people, culture, leadership, and business. And that, I think, is where I see the people and culture function shifting towards. And that's really why I put pen to paper. As I said, doing 2 books at the same time as well, Jonathan, kind of something twanged inside me earlier this year. I almost felt it twang, and it wasn't just my back. So never write 2 books at the same time is my best advice I can give to anyone.
Absolutely. And I like the fact that you brought about that integration between people, culture, and leadership there. And we've been talking to people and culture professionals for the last 2 years on the PCA. Earlier, the People and Culture videocast and the book club, and we met so many chief people officers. And some of the trends that we've discussed, of course, have gone into the space of EDI, and this is where I want to move into Shakil's expertise here. EDI normally tends to be just a chapter in another book. It's just something that's kind of cross-referenced here and there. But you decide to actually spend an entire book on this, right? You spend decades helping organizations kind of become more inclusive. And now you put in all that experience, all that wisdom into a book. So what's inspired you to kind of author this book, Shakil, and put the focus completely on EDI? And first of all, there is confusion about what the E stands. Some people think E stands for equality. Maybe you could also share some light on that, in terms of the difference between equality and equity there.
So equality and equity is an interesting question, because again, when coming up with the idea of what to call the book, there was a debate about whether it should have been called Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Explained. It should have been Diversity and Inclusion. There's a whole back and forth between myself and Kogan Page, but eventually I decided actually equity is probably the better word, because equality is more of a legacy word because of the Equality Act. So a lot of people talk about equality because of the Equality Act, having equal opportunity, but equality is all about treating everybody the same pretty much, and trying to and the belief that creates a fairer workplace. But in reality, it's not seeing people as individuals and seeing that difference and actually meeting them where they are and responding to their needs. So that's where that equality and equity difference comes in. But in terms of why writing this book, I'm very honored to actually share the stage with these 2 individuals today, simply because, and again, Perry, I know you know this, it was Perry about, how many years ago now? Was it 2013 when Perry said, Shakil, you should write. And that planted the idea of writing a book. Well, writing articles initially, but then also writing a book. And I think it was back in 2017, possibly, I could be wrong, when I was first asked to review Perry's book. And then straight after, I was asked to review David's book. And I thought, well, this is really interesting to actually see, how a book evolves, how it's constructed. And I thought to myself, I'd like to write a book one day. And I pitched an idea to Kogan Page. And just like David, I ended up writing 3 different books at one time. It didn't go well. Became overwhelmed. I ended up writing none of the 3 book ideas. But when Kogan Page reached out to me roughly this time last year and said, Shakil, would you be interested in writing a book on EDI? That really did appeal to me, because the title was EDI Explained, and it is pretty much what it says on the tin. Because in this space, there's a lot of mysticism and confusion and jargon, and it means different things to different people. So this book really is aimed at early HR practitioners, but I'd also say existing EDI leaders, because I want to really push the boat out and actually have a rethink and a reset about what EDI actually is and what it can be and should be to the profession.
Absolutely. And thanks for kind of putting that spotlight on EDI completely, this Shakil, because as I said, it normally tends to just get swept under with a little kind of reference in a chapter to a book. So I think there's a lot of value there, and you kind of bring that out very, very prominently in the book. Perry, I want to bring you in again. You put people experience right at the heart of the book, right at the heart of the new HR 3.0 operating model. What does that look like in practice? If you could share with us from your experience having worked with so many organizations, 30 plus years, in transforming work. How can HR measure experience more, I would say, meaningfully in the modern workplace today? And does the book talk about that?
Yeah, it does, without just making it about people experience, because I think a lot of people have written more eloquently and deeply than me about that. And I think we've got more comfortable with that term, haven't we? Because we've been for a long time talked about things like employee engagement and so on, and the employee life cycle. Now, I think when we talk about people experience, I think we've got a genuine attempt at actually intersecting not just what I'm writing about, but what David and Shakil have written about, which is where it intersects with things like culture and inclusion. How does it feel to work here? Now, what does it really mean? I mean, it does go beyond engagement. What do I think it means? It's all about the exchanges of value between you as an individual and the organization you're a part of. Because make no bones, that's what it's about. It isn't just the organization pays you for work that you do. It is that there is an exchange of value that is beyond the financial transactions. It's how do you look after me? How do you develop me? What do I do over and above and different from what I'm contracted to do because I believe in the spirit of this enterprise? So it's those kinds of questions that we don't engineer. We don't need to sort of put systems and processes in for all of that, but we need to acknowledge the spirit of it. And we need to recognize what it's like. So your question is, how do you measure it? Since writing the book, I've become really interested in the concept of flywheels, which have been quoted in work by Jim Collins in Good to Great many decades ago, right? And I think there's a flywheel for people experience. If you put people experience at the heart of it, the flywheel starts with things like trust and psychological safety. So it is almost like, what do we really mean by that? How do we measure that? How do we track that? How do we catch that? How do we course correct that? That's the first part in a value chain that needs to kind of go in a cyclical motion around people experience. The others, I've written them down just so I don't miss them. Voice and participation, which is all about what we see in both books from these two fine chaps. Growth and learning, that's part of this equation. I haven't even got to the work yet, but these are three things that you determine your people experience in order to do the work to your best of ability, because then you get things like autonomy and choice. Then you get into the realms of contribution and impact. So now we're starting to talk about what you do with the work. Then you get into recognition and energy. Then you get into belonging and the whole sense of how much you feel socially connected in the environment you're in. Now, if you haven't got those things going, guess what? We do a straight line between what's your job description, are you performing? That's far too crude. That's not people experience. People experience is all of those factors. They're not easy to measure, but the best way to measure them is to define them and then to look at them as part of a successional chain of events that help people do amazing work. So if you want to categorize them, inclusion, performance, and social. Just those three things are what people experience is about.
Fantastic. David, I know that you have spent a lot of time talking about people experience as well. You've been, trailblazing that, hashtag transforming work for the last 25 years, right from your early days as a mediator to now, who has kind of really dived so deep into the people and culture space as well. What does that mean for you? And have you been able to kind of capture that in your book, People and Culture?
Thanks, God. Perry's made some fantastic points, and I think there are some really worrying trends. I mean, if you look at the Gallup data and other data that talks to us about employee experience, people experience, well-being, engagement, inclusion in our workplaces, the trend tends to be on a downward trend. I think the challenge for many in HR, and one of the challenges, I'm just going to see if you could just mute, it's definitely picking up here. There's a downward trend, and I think one of the challenges that I try and offer in the book is to see if we're able to think. Jonathan, I'm just going to see if we can just press mute on your end there. I think I'm just getting some echo, if that's okay. Brilliant, thank you. Is to almost reimagine what it means to be a sort of HR professional, a people leader in our organisations. And what I tried to offer in the way I was thinking was building on the sort of frameworks of HR of the past, and trying to imagine what it might look like in the future. I kind of created these sort of 5 domains, if you will, sort of around people, sort of creating people-centered workplaces. What does that actually mean and look like? And to Perry's point, what does the people experience mean? Sort of think about how we align well-being, engagement and inclusion, the roles of policies, processes and procedures. How equipped are our managers for creating happy, healthy, harmonious workplaces where people thrive, teams flourish, the organization can excel? Because I think when all of those things combine, what I call that sort of employee experience equation, then we start to see a real increase in productivity and performance. And these are the key drivers. But we're driving productivity and performance through a leadership function and HR function by being purpose-driven, values-based, and people-centered, not about applying autocracy, command and control, having power over people rather than sharing power with them, using coaching skills and dialogue, compassion and insight, not as soft skills but as core capabilities. So that people-centered domain is a really important aspect of the people function, becoming the guardians and custodians of people-centered workplaces. Then the second domain is the strategy domain, and we see the people plan, the corporate strategy and other strategies often working in silos. And I think one of the tools I want to put in HR's toolbox is a hammer and a saw, and the hammer is to go silo smashing and create a combined strategic narrative where the people priorities become the corporate priorities, and the needs of the business and the needs of the employees are aligned, and the people function sits creating that alignment. I'll be quick. The third domain is the culture domain, creating truly transformational cultures, of which that was my last book, so I won't try and summarize my last book in a few words. But how do we create cultures which are fair and just? And I know Shakil will have a lot of thoughts around this in terms of inclusion, dignity, diversity, kindness, compassion, and how do we create those cultures, and what role does HR play in shaping those? The fourth domain often surprises people, and it's the justice domain. And I argue in the book that our justice systems and paradigms are broken, that they didn't work. Blame, shame and punishment doesn't change behavior. It doesn't work, and it will never work as much as we might try and wrap it up and make it sound good. So rethinking justice, moving from retributive justice systems, punitive, sanctions-based, reductive, adversarial, infantilizing the workforce, and then wringing our hands going, why is everyone behaving badly? Well, you just told them to in your script. Your policy is the script. The people are the actors. And so if we're going to change the behaviors, we need to change the script. And that's the justice. And suddenly the people function becomes an administration of justice department, but not the tired and dreary justice models of the past, which cause so much harm and distress and provide an illusion of fairness and a mirage of justice. And then the final domain is the value domain. And how do we measure value in a changing world? And what does value look like? And I would argue very simply, value is measured through four very powerful elements: creativity, innovation, insight, and learning. Because everything else can be automated. Everything else can be automated, but you can't automate that yet. And I hopefully never will, because we'll always have the AI working for us, not the other way around, to coin many people saying this now. So as we move into an augmented environment, how does HR, the people function, unlock the currency of the future of work? And we ain't going to do it by avoiding problems, and then when they become too difficult to avoid any longer, just going nuclear on them and going through some process which drags people to the gates of hell, and then hope that it's going to fix things, because it doesn't work. It's never worked, and it ain't ever going to work. That's the kind of structure I've been thinking about and shaping through the book.
Yeah, looking forward to kind of diving deeper into that. Thanks, David, for kind of really elaborating on that. It's very, very important for us to kind of understand these structures and just not kind of once again take it for granted in terms of when we talk about change management. I remember we talking to people and culture officers a couple of years ago, and a few people would come back to us and say, we've changed our designation, but we don't know what it really means. We're doing the same HR kind of responsibilities are still going on with those kind of tasks. But it's come a long way. It's a different world now, and it's fast changing, in the modern workplace. I always say that culture, kind of at the end of the day, it's the people who create the culture. The culture belongs to the people, and I think I want to bring you in here because a lot of people love to talk about EDI. In a modern workplace, in a multicultural workplace, especially, and the three of you operate largely in the UK, of course, internationally as well, but largely in the UK, and the UK is turning multiculturally, diverse every day. The workplace has changed massively over the last couple of decades, I would say. So, and you have worked with so many organizations, like Shakil. So, as an HR professional or leader, what are the biggest internal challenges for organizations and leaders to kind of implement EDI? And what does implementing EDI actually mean in practice? Because people love talking about it, but what does it actually mean in practice? What does it mean to experience EDI in the workplace?
So I'd say one of the biggest challenges that any organization faces is really the way EDI is seen and where it sits in the organization. So often EDIB or EDI, as it's often called, is seen as an afterthought. It's an add-on. It's not part of the design of the policy change or the practice or the product or service that you're offering. You don't involve diverse thinking in when trying to come up with diverse, purpose-fit solutions. And it's very much dependent on the appetite of the senior leadership team, because again, I've seen senior leaders who have claimed to, champion EDI, but actually, their appetite, their actions doesn't match their intent. So it's very much around actually seeing EDI, just like any other strategic part of the organization. It has to be clear deliverables. It has to be resourced. It has to be communicated. It has to be championed. It has to be reported upon. Otherwise, all you're doing very often is what we see and why we get such a bad rep for EDI in most workplaces is performative measures, one-off initiatives. I've heard organizations and some really forward-thinking organizations actually make the claim we've solved issues around racism. I think no, you haven't. You can't have. They're just too big. We're moving on from gender, and we're going to now focus on X or Y or Z. I'm like, wait, I know you haven't fixed gender. You might have made strides, and that's great, but it's a much bigger issue. We're talking about a legacy of decades of inequity that you're trying to rectify. It's not going to be an easy fix. Whenever I've judged awards, and again, I know Perry and David have judged awards, and I see an organization pitching for an award, and they've done something over 9 months or a year, and I'm thinking, okay, that's great. So what? What difference did it actually practically make? And very often organizations will tell us what they've done and how they've done it, but not why they've done it. What was the burning bridge? What was the problem they're trying to solve? Or what difference did it actually make to the organization? Did it create that culture of belonging? Did people feel more safe and secure in their organizations? Do they feel valued and heard? Are they given dignity? Because if all those things are in place, that's when you get people performing at their best. I always think that HR at its most, primary core essence is about helping people be the best versions of themselves. And that can only happen if they're able to be themselves and focus on the work and not have to think about conforming or dealing with an oppressive, system or a manager that's giving them making their life a misery. Work is a place we spend most of our time in, and when you think about the fact that we actually don't, most organizations aren't thinking about how can make that a better time for everyone. It's actually good for productivity. It's good for performance. It's good for everyone. It's good for people and planet if we think about it more holistically. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rampage there. A bit of a rant. But otherwise, what you end up with is tokenistic actions, and they never make a change.
Yeah. So we're at a halfway mark, and what I'm hearing from all three of you is that a lot of people want to be part of transforming work. A lot of people want to be part of creating change in the workplace and making workplaces better. But it's not. It's easier said than done, right? And there are a lot of talkers and a lot of preachers, but what it really means to actually put it into practice. And from my kind of limited knowledge, and of course reading through your scripts, I'm understanding very clearly that you are kind of putting that onus and empowering leaders to say, here are structures now, here are templates that you could start to explore and execute, and then see what the benefits of those are, whether it's through your book, Dave, with people culture, where your book with the HR operating model, or with Shakil's book, where he explains EDI very clearly. You're saying, bring out, let's start practicing this. It's enough of talking, right? And so for those of you joining us on the Transforming Work Book Club, continue to say hi. We would love to hear from you. If you've got questions for Perry and David and Shakil, do drop them in the LinkedIn comments and we'll take them. And of course, you, then become eligible for the draw on, if you get a lucky book, draw away, one of you will get a free book that, of course, is authored by Perry or Shakil or David. So Kogan Page is also offering a 25% off on the books. So please go and check that out on Amazon as well. I want to go off script here, if that's okay with the three of you. I know we had a few things to discuss, but I want to kind of keep this more of an open mic now, hot mic, where you could share some of the most recent conversations you've had with leaders. I know you're working with people all the time, you're consulting day in, day out. So what are some of the, without of course mentioning names and confidentiality, what are those very I would say intense, insightful conversations you're having with organizations, and what are the challenges they are sharing with you in terms of putting this into practice? Because let's bring out some case studies. Let's bring out some conversations. Why are people wanting to make change happen but unable to actually create it?
Can I just come in with a question, Jonathan, if I can, really quickly? I think it's on the area of ED&I, and I'm really keen to dig in. But Shakil, your book was published at the very same time that a storm was brewing in the Atlantic, and as we know, when the America sneezes, we catch a cold where there's streams of snot flying over the Atlantic at the moment. So we're going to be absolutely covered. So what I was curious to discuss, because one of the big topics is it's like the arguable business benefit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, such that we're able to withstand the pressures from those people who don't subscribe to the principles of ED&I, of which we're seeing that from a leadership perspective. And how did you kind of consider that as you were writing the book? And I suppose if you're looking at the text as a powerful call to action with really powerful data and drivers, does this provide the sort of the antidote, if you will, to that cold that might be coming our way? I think it may be, although we are resisting it in the UK. From what I can see, business leaders in the UK and the US, in fairness, are resisting it. But I just wondered, Shakil, given you wrote this at exactly the time that this has never been in the spotlight more, what were your thoughts about that? And does this provide part of an antidote? That was kind of just curious to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. So when I was writing the book, I was very conscious about what was happening here in the UK as well, because we had Esther McVeigh, who then was labelled the Common Sense Minister, talking about cutting back on DEI roles in, and this was, I think, around, if I remember correctly, it was around August last year, long before what was happening in the US happened. But then, obviously, with the pushback on EDI, I do feel that actually it was partially deserved, because again, we've got stage and position where we'd almost put people into pigeonholes and labels. So whilst we're about diversity and inclusion is great, we were also trying, there's a lot of shaming and guilt tripping people who have white middle-aged men, for example, in workplaces, and you were getting pushback and the label of, oh, this is wokeness gone crazy. And I do believe if you want to really bring people on a journey, you have to take people with you. You can't force people down a certain road. And the world of work is the way the world of work is. That's not going to change overnight. So the world of work was constructed. If you think about the early 1900s, it was people like Henry Fayol and Frederick Wilmslow Taylor and Deming, engineers, white engineers, middle-aged white engineers, straight able-bodied men who imagined the world of work for other white able-bodied men. It wasn't imagined for work for women. Women didn't come to the workplace until in large numbers until 1947, where the NHS was set up. Think about legislation and the role it's played. 1970 was we're still seeing equal pay claims taking place now, and it's only just yesterday, was the day before, that the Birmingham City Council finally settled its Equal Pay Claim Act. So legislation is not the answer, and if it was, we're not doing a great job with that. It is about trying to take people on a journey, but not trying to alienate the majority. Because if you alienate the majority, and they don't see the real reason for having fairness and equity in the workplace, the real value of difference, difference, you're just going to, you're going to create more barriers and more build, barriers rather than bridges. And you need bridges. I've had, again, I can't say the client, but I was talking to one individual who was very aggrieved over what he heard at a supposedly safe space where he was asking very reasonable questions. He'd come from a very insular background. He was asking questions around ethnicity and difference, and somebody took great offense over that. And I thought, well, actually, and he raised a complaint. I was asked to look at it, and in the end, it was very clear to me that, okay, yes, the person used clumsy language. Yes, the person wasn't articulate, but also the person wasn't coming from a place of maliciousness. It came from a place of not knowing. It's better for a person to go on a journey of learning and to help them get to a better place where they can actually see each other as equals, right? And accept there's difference. We're all different. That's what makes us, human. We're never going to, I always use the example, when I'm doing my training with people, individuals. Do you love your wife, your spouse, your partner? Yes, you do. Do you love your children or your parents? Yes, you do. Do you ever argue with them? Of course you do. So if you can argue with somebody you love and have differences with somebody you love, of course you can have differences with somebody you don't really know in the workplace. So it's not necessarily in itself a problem. Coming back to your point, we need to learn how to disagree well. It's okay to have a different worldview. It's okay to be in a different mindset, but it's not okay when that crosses boundaries and we take away the dignity of somebody else. So that's what I'd say. It's, as I said, it's self-inflicted because I do think there's been a typical trend to move towards fads. So 2017 we had the gender pay gap, we had the Me Too movement, we had 2020 the George Floyd murder, Sarah Everard's murder in 2021. So what we saw was organizations shifting towards gender, towards being more anti-racist. But when things come out of the spotlight, those same boards and so senior leaders shift again because they didn't really buy the idea of what they were doing and why they were doing it. And it's about actually helping them see the real value of difference. And again, there's plenty of research out there, which is in the book, which you can look at.
Yes, brilliant.
What makes have diverse thinking in organizations, especially in a climate where everyone's trying to find a competitive edge. You need people who can think differently and respond and think about their the people they're providing products and services to, but inevitably going to be different people. They're, your people that you're trying to serve are different, diverse communities. And if you haven't got that internally, you're never going to be able to reach them in a holistic way. Great question, David. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think it's really good because I think it's like how do we use the data and the evidence to be able to make that case. I also what I really liked as I was hearing you speaking there, Shakil, was just a very kind of candid, pragmatic view of the challenges that surrounded ED&I as well, rather than trying to protect it as a concept. What you're trying to do is not rather than protect that, if you like, as an industry, or is actually protecting the principles of fairness and equity, inclusion, and celebrating diversity in our workplaces. And I think there's a real challenge there in HR, because I think what Shakil was saying there, I think, Perry, is we've been a bit fad-led. And I just wonder if, I don't know, HR can be a bit fad-led, and how, I just wonder, I think that's something I know the HR 3.0 operating model is trying to move away from fad to actually structural, systemic. It's head, heart and gut, isn't it, what you're doing, I think? Would that be a fair...
It would. Yeah, I think we are guilty of fadism, but then I think the whole of the business community is guilty of fadism. So we just got kind of swept up in that. I don't think we're any more guilty. And I've seen, marketers and whatever do enormously faddist stuff without facts and science, right? So I think that's what I'm just taking away from what Shakil's just said. There is no threat in wokeness. I mean, that's the ridiculous nature of it, because when you fall back into facts and science, you've got all you need, right? Yeah. So the backlash against EDI is people who have weaponized anti-wokeness. That's all it is, right? Yeah. They're threatened by it, but there is no threat. That's all attitudinal, behavioral, systemic, cultural stuff that people, like Shakil just said, just need to think this through with the facts and the science and open conversations. To pursuit of justice and fairness. So how do you defad yourself? you have to look at the impact. You kind of work with the impact and go back, right? What are you after? Will the fad get you there? Because if you get too anti-faddist, guess what? You miss out on some amazing innovations. Because people say agile's a fad, but I've seen it reinvent how people deliver value. So you just got to stress test it in the way that you know is going to get you to outcomes, because then I think it kind of devoids you of either falling into the trap of being anti-faddist to the point of almost removing opportunities, or so faddist you are quite literally leaping from fad to fad without ever putting it into practice. That's definitely the essence of that. And so 3.0 is an attempt to do that. It's not a model you have to absolutely implement. It's a platform to enable you to put the model that's right for your context.
I love that. And I think the nice thing about fads is it gives us a nice meme for LinkedIn. It's like, it's all very glossy, and the ad marketing and ads team can come up with something that looks really glossy, but it also distracts us from actually listening to and answering the really tough questions in our organizations, because we can go for the high profile awards and say lots of lovely things. And I see great organizations talking about their latest application of the fad. Well, my mediators and investigators and coaches are coming out of their basements going, whoa, that is insane. What's going on in that organization? And there's this mismatch of what's happening. I think what I've been trying to do, and I think this is why our messages are so interconnected between the three of what we're saying. I know that many others are too. And it's something that I'm really excited about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, by the way, Perry and Shakil, is the concept of the consumer employee, and that concept of using product development, customer experience thinking as consumers. Because I think when we start to treat people as the consumer of process, the consumer of leadership, the consumer of structure, actually it causes us to have to do some things like that. Listen, be curious. And I heard, Shakil, when you're talking, there's a potential disconnect, but also a massive opportunity where curiosity and asking the silly question can be seen as ignorance and potentially something of a problem. But also, how else are we going to learn if we don't ask the question? So how do we act with curiosity to learn and to listen to the consumer employee and build the products and services? And then how do we as people professionals then zoom out, and instead of going for the latest fad and the meme on LinkedIn about how wonderful and passionate we are and agile, or whatever it is that we are saying we are, it's what are you actually doing in your organization, and how do we move to make real substantial, lasting, meaningful change in those organizations? And that's something I'm really kind of concentrating. I know that's, like I said, I know it's a connection between the three of us, but I just wondered, Shakil and Perry, because we all talk about the product development, that concept of consumer, and I know you do, Perry. I just wondered, I do as well. I love it, but I just thoughts on that, Perry. I mean, you talk about this, and Shakil, I'd love to hear, obviously.
Shall I start, Shakil?
Yeah.
All right.
Get around and see where it goes.
So there's a bizarre twist going on here in my mind, really, which is what HR has done up to recently without any accusations of it at all, because it's the prevailing system, has created programmable interventions. That's what it's done, right? It has treated everything as a predictable, scripted, algorithmic thing that everybody has to either comply with or whatever. And what consumerism has taught us is that actually that will only get you so far before people say, well, I don't see myself with that product. That doesn't deliver the value for me because I have unique parameters that you're not addressing. Now, when you get involved in something like product development, the whole point of it starts with empathizing with the people, the users, the consumers who you're doing it for. So have we ever written a policy in HR by thinking about who is this for? If we do, we think it's to stop or trap people doing the bad things. Not how does it enable people to do more of the good things? It's a bizarre twist that we've kind of got ourselves into because of the, shall we say, the thin line between the legality side of things and therefore then the interpretive practice, right? So I think that's where I'd start. When I first started to even introduce this concept, I saw a massive mental model shift in HR practitioners who suddenly realized that they should be utilizing product ownership and product management because they're building things for people to create value and solve problems. And that's where the whole thing comes from for me. So yeah, the playfulness of HR 3.0 is quite deliberately there to kind of link it to Web 3.0. So it kind of gives it that frame, but really it's the technology that underpins people and culture, equity and inclusion. That's all I'm trying to create. And then the products you build on the top of that are the things that you've both said are there to create value and impact for people. Shakil, over to you, mate.
Thank you very much. So I'd say in my book in chapter 5, I talk about what typically is seen as an EDI initiative or intervention, and why I think, and again, whenever I judge the awards, I see the same solutions to the same scenarios again and again, being whether it's employee resource groups, whether it's an introduction of pronouns, whether it's EDI training. It's very much same old, same old. What's not being asked is what is the actual problem the organization is trying to address. What is, and again, aligning that with also what is keeping the senior leaders up at night. If they don't really care about the issue and it doesn't align with what's keeping them up at night, you're never going to really have a anything really beyond tokenism. And for me, it's about asking that question: what is the issue? So what does that mean for the organization? So what? But then now what? And what we're going to do with that information? Because again, just putting people through training is not going to bring about change. And whenever I deliver training, and I've delivered training to senior leaders, and often it's quite telling. Even that, when I get asked, I ask the questions: how long do I have with the senior leaders? You have 4 hours, great, I can do a lot in 4 hours. You have 2 hours, okay, I can do a lot less. You have an hour, okay, so really it's just to tick a box, because I know I'm not going to bring any change. I can't change anyone. I can maybe take them on a journey. I can have them have some aha moments, make them stop and think and reflect, but it's not going to bring about any change, not really. So it's actually about trying to go beyond and think more deeply about the issue that we're trying to address. And very often, and again, just badging on from my last comment, very often EDI leads have their own trauma. So they often have a strand of EDI they're particularly passionate about. Nothing wrong with that. But a lot of EDI leads in this space were recruited in the wake of the George Floyd murder or the Me Too movement, and they champion their own strand rather than actually thinking about EDI more holistically. And they just replicate the same old solutions rather than thinking about the employee journey, about thinking about how does discrimination actually show up from the point a person joins the organization to how they're recruited, to how they're developed, to how their performance is managed, to employee relations issues, and to the exit interview. How does that look like? Where does discrimination show up? What are the barriers? Where's the inequity? Is there any disproportionality? They're not using metrics. And if you're not thinking about this in a scientific way, there's never going to be any real change. It has to be, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then real measures about how to actually identify which milestones have been achieved and what's the next horizon, because it's going to be another horizon. As I said, you're never going to fix this. It's just there's too much, but doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And coming back to this thing about getting things wrong, absolutely. I'd rather leaders get wrong than not even try, because it is going to be an iterative process. It is about the destination, not an endpoint. And I think that's true for coming back to your both books. I don't think it'd be very presumptuous to think that we've now cracked it. We haven't. It's always going to keep the landscape we're working in is constantly changing. The tools that we have are constantly are evolving. And I do believe HR has to evolve and to reclaim EDI, because I was never comfortable with EDI sitting outside of HR, and which is again when I reached out to both of you to get your view on where do you think EDI sits within HR. I find it very reassuring that actually, if we want to have an impact, it's that joint up thinking. It's not an outside, standalone issue or an intervention. It's actually a combined, holistic approach to treat people like people.
That's a really powerful point, and I think I talk about this alignment between well-being, engagement, and inclusion, and seeing these becoming a sort of shared strategic narrative as well. Because ultimately, and I love the point you're raising, Shakil, which I think in paraphrase in terms, if it's not measured, it's not managed. How do we create all of these data points? And I think creating an alignment between a happy, healthy, and harmonious workplace, a strategic alignment between well-being, engagement, and inclusion, and seeing that running as a thread through the corporate strategy. Because until it's in the corporate strategy, it's always a bolt-on. If it ain't in the corporate strategy, it's a bolt-on. It's an adjunct to the organization. Might have lots of nice words and lots of nice ideas and lots of very busy people with good meaning trying to do some great work. But it's still an adjunct to the corporate strategy. So ensuring it's in that corporate strategy and creating that alignment between those core elements, I think is critical. I'm a big fan of developing hubs and clusters within organizations, a culture hub and like these local culture clusters and small centers of excellence. Well, I'm a big fan of the sort of traditional center of excellence. But we need some modern ones. a resolution center of excellence, wellbeing engagement center of excellence, a culture center of excellence, which pulls together multiple stakeholders. But I just saw Jen's question. There's been some great comments. I love all these comments in the chat function, and I don't know why I cannot get my comments to post. I can see you're busy there, Perry. I'm sorry I'm not responding to it, but I can't. Every time I try and post, it says post failed to send, so forgive me for not actually putting anything in the chat function. But Jen, I think that this is a great question for all of us, I think, and Jonathan, I'm sure you've got some views on this as well. But I'm going to start off with my answer to this question, Jen, if that's okay. But what do you see as some of the non-negotiables we should be prioritizing in order to move towards a more people and culture focused, people experience type model? Well, I'm going to just throw it out there because I guess people might, who know me well, know that I'm going to say this, is you cannot describe yourself as a progressive people and culture professional and have a grievance procedure. The two things are in direct opposition to one another. And that everything's negotiable. I'm a mediator. Everything's negotiable, but it's not negotiable in our organizations to have a rigid, autocratic, destructive, harmful process called a grievance procedure and a progressive, compassionate people and culture function, or so we might call it. So the non-negotiable is, if you are in HR or people function and you want to describe yourself as a compassionate function which delivers compliance, and those two things can coexist. Compassion and compliance can coexist, by the way. Empathy and empowerment can coexist. These things can happen, but they don't coexist through a grievance procedure. So my non-negotiable, Jen, just to get the conversation started, is you cannot describe yourself as a compassionate people professional and drag people to hell when things go wrong. And we've heard about the importance of failure and learning and curiosity. It destroys those principles and it strikes fear into the heart, not just people going through them, but people who are then feel they're at risk of having those processes. That's my non-negotiable. Jen, I know colleagues on the call will have theirs as well, but I thought I'd get started if that's okay, because I have the pen and the pen is mightier than the sword. So Jonathan, you've been in this area for a good old while. What do you think is some of the non-negotiables?
I completely agree with you. I think sometimes people are afraid to embrace conflict. I think conflict is good. In workplaces, in modern workplaces, I think talking about things you're not comfortable about and kind of bringing out differences and difference of opinions is something that's so crucial. So I completely agree with you that it's what we need to work on is our conflict communication, our conflict language. Conflict by itself is not bad, right? Yeah. And so, even in the evolving HR space right now, I think this is where I'm also very kind of curious about learning from the three of you as well here, because I know we're running out of time, but for the modern workplace, as HR evolves into people and culture, as HR evolves into a new operating model, as Perry says, 3.0, as Shakil says, where HR is starting to now be more not just aware and educated about EDI, but also kind of more involved in implementing that. What would you say are the top 2 or 3 skills that the modern HR leader or a people and culture leader or an EDI leader needs to kind of get into their ammo right now? What would you say are those 2 or 3 skills? Quick responses from you all, maybe.
Do you want me to go first?
Yes.
So just a quick answer to Jen's non-negotiable. The non-negotiable should be that we practice participative HR. So we invite people in to help us craft it, right? That's my answer to that one. My 2 top skills here are absolutely systems thinking and people science. End of. Just get those 2 things right. Bang, off you go. Systems thinking, people science.
Lovely. Okay. Shakil?
I'd say again, like Perry, I'll answer it in 2 parts. So the first part is actually start with a blank page and move away from what's so-called best practice and actually think about what the organization really needs. We have too often, same old for that same reason. In terms of the skills, again, I had a whole section on the skills and EDI practitioner needs, but based on today's conversation, I'd say the 3 that I would focus on would be curiosity, empathy, because again, you need to be able to see the other person and see yourself reflected in that other person, and being authentic yourself as a leader. If you want people to be authentic, then you need to be authentic. You need to be vulnerable. You need to, role model. It's okay to get things wrong. It's okay to not have all the answers, because that then gives permission for everybody else to stop conforming, and they can then focus on performing.
David, if I can add it to your plate as well, besides the top skills, in your experience, have you seen resistance from, say, leadership, legal teams in terms of, even if someone picks up those skills, is there any kind of resistance to change from your experience of speaking to organizations?
It's Friday afternoon. How controversial can I be in answering my question? Let me see. I'm going to go for it. So the first thing I'd say is what they just said in terms of the skills and capabilities. Fly the why. Express the purpose and really advocate the purpose. The biggest barrier to change within the HR function doesn't come from the executive or the unions or the workforce. It comes from within HR itself. And my experience of working within HR is they perceive that there is an existential threat to HR's role if HR isn't engaging in some case management system or some process of some kind somewhere within the organisation. My reassurance, I did 30 interviews for my book with chief people officers across the globe, chief executive officers. Each of them said this really powerful thing to me: kindness, compassion, dialogue, insight. These are the strategic capabilities for the future of HR. So don't worry if you're not doing case management and we're not on this hamster wheel of investigative process and systems and looking like we're really busy and adding value by mitigating risk. People can see through that. That's not adding value, folks. That's not the value add we're looking for in a modern, diverse, complex, distributed workplace. What we're looking for is adding value through insight, learning, growth, creativity, the four currencies of the future of work. So the biggest barrier to change comes from within HR because there is a fear of, if I'm not doing those things, will people think I'm not doing anything? So we have to, and I think Shakil's point is powerful, and everything that Perry said and written is so fundamentally important. You are valuable. You're delivering the most incredible value in the organization. Celebrate your value. Reframe how you do it and how you give that value, and recognize that actually doing the things that we're talking about is the future of HR. And without doing this, I'd say that's the existential threat. So to me, the barriers come from within, and I think that's where I certainly, and I think Perry and Shakil too, are saying, look, it's okay to do this. It's okay. You'll be okay if you do this. That's my message.
I like that, looking outside from inside in many ways, right? I guess there is the resistance from your own team sometimes when you're thinking of implementing change, and there is a lot of work that has to be done there. Well, gentlemen, guess what? We are 4 minutes away from official wrap up. I wish I could speak to you all day long, but it's all about these fantastic books that you have written, right? And for those of you who are not following Shakil or Perry or David on LinkedIn, they're always blogging there. There you go. Look at that. You could fan yourself with that.
They're heavy. You need to go to the gym to be able to manage this little lot.
But for those of you, of course, who are not following them on LinkedIn, please do. They're always blogging about things like, what we've discussed today. They're so passionate about. I want to wrap up. I want to rest the last 3 minutes by asking you something a bit more aspirational. Maybe throw it out to you first, Shakil, in terms of your book as well. You've poured your experience into this. For those of your readers who have read this book, for HR leaders who will read it in the future, what do you hope? If you could summarize, what do you hope the least that you would expect them to take out of this and try and put into practice?
So for me, a book is about legacy, and my book is about changing mindsets. And I believe in the right hands. I'm hoping my book can become the go-to resource for real change. And it's actually, I suppose the takeaway message at the end of the book is really about it's okay to see difference, and that we actually have more in common than that which divides us.
Lovely. Thank you, Shakil. That's well said, crisp and clear there. As I said, if it's easier said than done, and so but I think as our authors have emphasized all day long, if you do not try, you've already failed. So you have to give it a shot. Perry, over to you. If everyone had started to implement the HR 3.0 model, right, that you speak in your book, the HR operating model, what does the future of work look like then? If everyone's implementing this?
Yeah, well, I think we know it's a very unorthodox world, right? It doesn't comply to previous paradigms and thinking that we've been accustomed to. So why would you repeat orthodoxy? So this book is a call to be unorthodox. And I think that is what we continue to be. The more comfortable we get with unorthodox thinking, the more likely we are to make a good show on the world's lacking orthodoxy anyway, right? So I think that's where we're going. And as David said, there's this whole thing about what will the machines do. I wouldn't worry about what the machines will do. I will just continue to get us to focus on what more we can do for human good. Simple as that. So let's be unorthodox in pursuit of human good.
Well, let's be unorthodox. I love that. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Barry, once again for really inspiring us through this. David, you have the last word. People and Culture coming out in January 2026. As I said, it's the modern workplace is now engrossed with AI and machine learning and hybrid working. How much of this would have an impact on people and culture, the function, the future? And what would you say is that one behavior that's going to really make a difference for a people and culture officer of tomorrow?
Love it. So in the in the text, in the preface, I talk about this word called oracular. Oracular. I'm not sure people are familiar with the term oracular. An oracular HR people function, the oracle of the workplace, with divine wisdom and knowledge, predicting the future using data and a deep understanding of the needs and motivations of the workforce in order to be able to shape and predict the future of work. And as the HR function or the people function rises above policy, process and procedure in the sort of traditional sense of what HR has perhaps done in the past, and starts to see itself as not having a seat at the table, but becoming the strategic table around which we are sitting to learn and live, it gives the people function to me one of the most powerful tools and assets and capabilities that we ever need in business and in the world of work, the ability to predict forward. Because if you can predict the future in these volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous times, the organizations which can predict tomorrow are the organizations which will have the greatest competitive advantage anywhere in the world. And if the people function can gather data from all of those intersections and interactions and engagements within our organization, augmented with powerful generative AI systems and platforms and tools to be able to help assimilate and manage that data, and utilize that data to understand what's happening now, but to predict forward, so too does the people function become truly oracular and become strategically, in my humble opinion, the most important function at work. And I think when we can do that, that capability, and we have to do that, we have to break some old habits and we have to let those go because we have a vice-like grip on some of those. But as soon as we release that, we release ourselves to become a truly oracular function, the oracle of our workplaces. And that's what I sort of describe in the book. I think it would be fair to say.
Well, I'm not going to try and summarize 3 books, but if I'm not going to try and do that. But yeah, if I had to say it, Shakil, I think your call out is to once again to leaders to embrace EDI and put it into practice and not be afraid of getting it wrong, but to keep trying, right? And you have put out a very clear blueprint with your book. Very, once again, a call out from you that the HR function is changing, and it's important to be agile. It's important to be kind of open to ideas and be human centric at the end of the day. That's where the function's hitting. And David, once again, with your book, you are once again putting the onus back on the leadership, and also asking leaders to kind of embrace the new trends and everything that's happening in terms of AI and technology, but also once again looking at justice differently. And that's something that, once again, we didn't have time to get into that. But once again, I'll call out there in terms of looking at justice differently in terms of workplace conflict. But gentlemen, thank you so much for spending your afternoon, your busy Friday afternoon, on the Transforming Work video cards, the Transforming Work book club. Sorry, we also have a video cast, which we do every fortnight, but this is the book club. The focus was on these 3 fantastic books. As mentioned, and you can see the banner at the bottom of your screen, you can get a copy of these books. Kogan page 25 is the code you got to use, and you should get a copy. We had a call out that went out and said, if you start commenting on LinkedIn and you've got some good comments there, then you would be eligible for a prize. And I was just watching some. We don't need to take this into post production, is my thought. We have some really, really good comments coming there. So I'm going to kind of take a call list as the manager of the PCA and say, here are the 3 winners of our lucky draw. Danny has already purchased your books, so he's not getting a free copy. He's not going to do anything with 2 copies of your book. So he's already got copies. Danny, thank you so much for withdrawing from the contest. But congratulations to maybe John Codman, Alistair McKay, and of course, right on top there in the start, we had a very, very nice touching comment from, of course, Diana Chittigale, who joined us all the way from Switzerland. So see how Kogan Page gets that book all the way up to the Alps. But once again, if you're not a member at the PCA, congratulations to Diana and Alistair, of course, and Jen. We'll send you the details. If you could please drop me a mail at info@peopleprofessionals.org. That's all you got to do. Drop me a mail at info@peopleprofessionals.org, and I'll be then sending over your details to Kogan Page so the book gets into your mail. If you're not a member of the PCA yet, it's free. Please do join us. We have these.
Did you say free, Jonathan?
I said free, David.
Did you say free to join the amazing PCA? Whoa, come on.
There you go. That's the kind of reaction we need from every guest. But yeah, it's free. Do join us once again, www.peopleprofessionals.org. And of course, you can drop an email as well, send you more details. Shakil, Perry, David, thank you so much for spending a busy Friday afternoon. And I'll see you on the other side.
Amazing. Thanks,
So,
Jonathan.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Perry. Thank you so much.